Hello everyone and welcome back to Nocturnal Narrative Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from. Without further ado, let's begin the story. The transfer to Yellowstone's northeast boundary station wasn't my first choice. Actually, it wasn't on my list of choices at all. But as the newest ranger in the service, I didn't have much say in the matter. When the regional supervisor called, with the assignment, there was an odd hesitation in his voice. "It's a bit isolated, Ranger Chen," he said, clearing his throat, "especially in winter. But the previous rangers have all requested transfers, so we need someone reliable out there." I took it as a compliment rather than the warning it was meant to be. Fresh out of training, eager to prove myself, I saw the remote posting as an opportunity. I'd always been comfortable with solitude anyway, preferred it even. 3 months, at a boundary station, monitoring wildlife movements and occasional winter hikers sounded perfect. The station itself was surprisingly well equipped for its remote location. A sturdy 2-room cabin with solar panels, a backup generator, satellite, internet intermittent at best, and a radio for emergency communications. The previous ranger had left everything meticulously organized, though I noticed they hadn't left the customary welcome note or tips for their replacement. My first 2 weeks passed uneventfully. I settled into a routine of morning patrols, afternoon, paperwork, and evening radio check-ins. The October weather was crisp but fair, with just enough snowfall to dust the landscape without impeding movement. I spotted wolf tracks, documented a small herd of elk, and turned back 2 hikers attempting to venture into closed territory. Normal ranger work. Peaceful. That changed the night I discovered the hidden compartment. I was reorganizing the supply shelves when my hand brushed against what felt like a seam in the wooden paneling. Curious, I pressed against it and heard a soft click. A section of the wall slid sideways, revealing a narrow space behind the shelves. Inside was a stack of leather-bound books, logbooks, but not the official ones kept in the filing cabinet. These were personal logs, dating back to 1973 when the boundary station was first established. I pulled them out one by one, arranging them chronologically on my desk. There were 17 books in total, each labeled with a ranger's name and dates of service. The first thing I noticed was that no ranger had stayed at this station for more than a single winter season. The second thing I noticed was that every single log ended abruptly, mid-entry. Intrigued, I began reading, starting with the earliest log from Ranger James Whitaker, winter 1973-74. November 15th, 1973, first significant snowfall today. Station is well stocked for winter. Radio communications clear. Nothing unusual to report except for strange tapping sounds on the north window around 2 a.m. Probably just branches in the wind. December 3rd, 1973. Blizzard conditions for the past 3 days. No wildlife sightings. Tapping on windows has continued nightly, always during the heaviest snowfall. Not random. There's a pattern to it. Almost like Morse code, but not quite. We'll attempt to transcribe tomorrow night. December 4th, 1973. Transcribe the tapping pattern. 3 short, 1 long, 4 short, 2 long. Repeats for approximately 20 minutes, then stops. No branches near the north or west windows where tapping occurs. Temperature dropped to 15 degrees tonight. December 10th, 1973. Blizzard has intensified. Radio communications spotty. Tapping now occurs on all windows simultaneously, which should be impossible for branches or wildlife. The pattern has become more complex. I've begun responding by tapping back the same pattern. God help me, but tonight it changed its pattern immediately after I responded, as if, and that was it. The entry ended mid-sentence. The next entry was from a different ranger, beginning in November 1974. I stayed up all night reading through the logs. Each told a similar story. Strange tapping during snowstorms, patterns that grew more complex over time, and rangers who began to respond to the tapping. Each log ended abruptly during the height of winter, usually during a severe storm. Each New ranger the following season made no mention of their predecessor's fate. The most recent log belonged to Ranger Sarah Keller, winter 2022-23. Her final entry was dated February 17, 2023. The tapping has evolved. It's learned to mimic the sound of my voice now. Last night during the storm, I heard myself calling from outside the station. The radio has been dead for 2 days. The pattern it taps now is the same as my heartbeat. I measured it. It knows I'm alone in here. It's trying the door handle tonight. The wood is swelling from the cold, but that won't keep it out much longer. I should have never answered its taps. If anyone finds this, do not respond to the... I closed the book, my hands shaking. Sarah Keller was the ranger who had requested transfer last spring. According to official records, she had completed her assignment without incident. There was no mention of any unusual occurrences in her official logs. I carefully returned the books to their hidden compartment, trying to rationalize what I'd read. Isolation plays tricks on the mind. 17 rangers experiencing similar auditory hallucinations wasn't impossible, especially in this environment. The abrupt endings were probably just coincidences. They got tired or were interrupted, or simply abandoned their unofficial logs. That's what I told myself as the first major snowstorm of the season began that night. The snow started around sunset, light flurries that quickly intensified. By midnight, visibility was near zero, and the wind howled around the station's corners. I was updating the official weather log when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap on the north window. I froze, pen hovering above paper. Just the wind, I told myself. Just ice or snow hitting the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. A pattern. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. Exactly as described in Whitaker's first log. I forced myself to approach the window, flashlight in hand. The beam revealed nothing but swirling snow against the darkness. No branches near this window. Nothing that could be causing the sound. Yet the tapping continued, moving to the west window, then the south. Always the same pattern. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The storm continued for 4 days, and each night the tapping returned, its pattern growing more complex. I documented everything in both the official log and a personal journal I started, determined to maintain a scientific approach to whatever was happening. On the 5th night, I broke. After hours of the incessant tapping, now a complicated rhythm that somehow reminded me of language, I tapped back, mimicking the pattern on the window frame. The tapping stopped immediately. For 10 long seconds, there was only silence and the howl of the wind. Then it responded with a new pattern, shorter, but more complex. Just wildlife, I whispered to myself. Probably a confused bird or rodent seeking shelter from the storm. But I knew no animal could maintain such precise evolving patterns, or tap on all windows simultaneously, as it began to do the following night. 2 weeks into the storm, a record-breaking blizzard that had knocked out my radio communications and satellite internet, the tapping changed. It began to sound less like knuckles on glass and more like words. Muffled, distorted, but definitely words. My name. It was tapping my name in a pattern that matched the syllables. I huddled in the center of the main room, away from all windows, recording in my journal with shaking hands. January 15th, 2024. It knows my name. The tapping has become more insistent, almost desperate. I've stopped responding. Whatever is out there, it's not natural, not wildlife, not weather. The pattern now matches my heartbeat when I press my fingers to my wrist. How could it know that? Radio still down. Satellite connection impossible in this storm. I am completely alone here, or not alone at all. The next night, I heard my own voice outside the station calling my name. It was perfect, my exact tone, my slight accent. But I was inside, huddled under blankets, watching frost form intricate patterns on the windows that looked disturbingly like writing. January 16th, 2024. It's mimicking my voice now, calling to me from the storm. The temperature has dropped to 30 degrees Celsius. Nothing human could survive out there. I've barricaded the door with the bookshelf. The tapping has moved to the door now. Tap, tap, tap. Like knuckles, but too rhythmic, too precise. I keep the generator running constantly now, afraid of what might happen in the darkness. On the 17th day of the storm, I heard the door handle turn. The wood had swollen from the cold and moisture, making it stick in the frame, small, blessing. The tapping had become a constant, gentle scraping like fingernails seeking purchase. January 17th, 2024. It's trying to get in. The door handle keeps turning, though it can't open yet. The scraping sounds have a pattern too, like it's trying to learn the mechanism of the lock. I've pushed all furniture against the door. If rescue doesn't come soon, I stopped writing, as the scraping suddenly ceased. For the first time in over 2 weeks, the station was completely silent except for the hum of the generator. Then I heard it, a new sound from the roof, something heavy moving across the shingles. Deliberate steps, heading toward the chimney. I quickly stuffed my journal into the hidden compartment with the others, my hands trembling so badly I could barely manage it. As I slid the panel closed, I heard a sound from the fireplace, something sliding, scraping, down the chimney. The fire had gone out hours ago. I backed away, grabbing the poker, watching as soot and snow drifted down onto the cold ashes. The radio crackled suddenly to life, making me jump. Through the static, I heard a voice. Human. Official. Northeast Boundary Station, this is Ranger Dispatch. Do you copy? Storm's breaking. We're sending a team to check on you. ETA 3 hours. Do you copy? I lunged for the radio, nearly sobbing with relief. This is Ranger Chen. I copy. Please hurry. There's some... The radio died again. But I'd been heard. Help was coming. I just needed to hold out for 3 more hours. A soft thud from the fireplace. Something had reached the bottom. I backed away, still clutching the poker. The temperature in the room seemed to drop rapidly, my breath clouding in front of my face. From the fireplace emerged nothing I could clearly see. Just a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. But cold. So cold, it burned. It moved with purpose, flowing across the floor toward me, leaving frost patterns in its wake. I swung the poker through it. It passed through empty air, but the metal turned white with instant frost, so cold it stuck to my gloves. The shape paused, then rose up, forming a vaguely humanoid silhouette of distorted air. No features, no substance, just an absence that somehow had presence, and then it spoke, using my voice, my exact inflections. I've been so alone, it said, for so long. I pressed my back against the wall, unable to retreat further. What are you? The shape rippled. I am the watcher, the listener, the learner. My voice, but wrong somehow. Too precise, too measured. I've been here always, learning from each of you. The other rangers, I whispered. What happened to them? It drifted closer. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on my eyelashes. They joined me, became part of me, as you will. Help is coming, I said, my voice breaking. They'll be here in 3 hours. Yes, it agreed, sounding pleased. More to learn from, more to join. It moved faster than I could react, enveloping me in that burning cold. I couldn't scream. My throat froze instantly. I couldn't move. My muscles locked in the extreme cold. I could only watch as it examined me, learning me, becoming me. And then I understood what it was, what it had always been. The cold itself, the winter, given consciousness through decades of isolation and interaction with human minds. It had learned from each ranger, absorbing their knowledge, their patterns, their essence. As darkness crept in from the edges of my vision, I saw it move to my desk, pick up my pen with a hand that looked increasingly solid, increasingly like my own. It began to write in the official log, using my handwriting. Almost perfectly, but not quite. The last thing I remember is watching it practice my signature, over and over, preparing to greet the rescue team when they arrived. When the rescue team reached Northeast Boundary Station, they found Ranger Chen in good health, though somewhat affected by the long isolation. The station was immaculately maintained with detailed logs of the 17-day storm. The final entry, dated January 17, 2024, read, "Storm finally breaking. Radio contact re-established briefly. Rescue team arriving soon. Nothing unusual to report, except some minor damage to the roof from ice buildup. Looking forward to seeing other humans after these long weeks alone. The solitude has been educational, but I'm ready for company. We're all ready for company." The handwriting was almost a perfect match for Ranger Chen's earlier entries. Almost. I've always been the type who needs to disconnect completely to truly find peace. No cell service, no people, just me and the wilderness. That's why I planned a week-long solo hike through the backcountry of Glacier National Park. I'd done plenty of research, packed all the essentials, and left a detailed itinerary with both my sister and the park rangers. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. The majesty of those mountains, the crystal clear lakes, the absolute silence that you can only find when you're truly alone. I set up camp near a grove of ancient pines on the second night, the kind that have stood watching over the land for centuries. That's when I first heard it. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, the wind picked up through the pines. Nothing unusual about that, except there was something different about the sound. It wasn't just the random whistle of air through needles. It had a rhythm to it, almost like breathing. I dismissed it as my imagination and the exhaustion from hiking all day with a full pack. But the next morning, as I was breaking camp, I heard it again. A whisper that seemed to form words just at the edge of comprehension. "Stay longer." I spun around, certain someone was there, but saw only trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. I laughed at myself, chalking it up to the way our brains try to find patterns in random sounds. I packed up and continued along my planned route. By midday, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every time I stopped to rest or check my map, the forest would fall completely silent for a few moments. Then the whispering would start again, slightly louder than before. "James, we've been waiting for you." My name. I definitely heard my name. I'm not easily spooked, but hearing your own name whispered by an empty forest will test anyone's nerves. I pulled out my phone to check for service. Nothing, of course. But I opened the voice recorder app anyway. If I was going to start hearing things, I might as well document it. That night I made camp earlier than planned. Something about the darkening forest made me uneasy, and I wanted my tent set up before the light faded completely. As I cooked my freeze-dried meal over my portable stove, the whispering returned. "We know why you came here, James. Running from your failures again." I nearly dropped my food. That was specific. Too specific. I had recently lost my job after a project I led failed spectacularly. It was the main reason for this trip, to clear my head and figure out what to do next. How? "Could you know that?" I said aloud, immediately feeling foolish for responding to the wind, but the wind answered back. "We know everything about you, James. We've been watching you since you entered our domain." I grabbed my phone and started recording. The whispers continued, mentioning details about my life that no stranger could possibly know. My sister's name, the childhood dog I still dreamed about, the real reason my last relationship ended. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I decided to cut my trip short. This was no longer the peaceful retreat I'd hoped for. I packed quickly and consulted my map, plotting the fastest route back to the trailhead. But as I started hiking, the whispers grew more insistent. "Don't leave yet, James. We have so much to show you." I quickened my pace, but somehow, I kept getting turned around. Landmarks I was certain I'd passed hours ago would appear again. My compass began spinning wildly, never settling on a direction. By afternoon, I had to admit I was lost. The trail I'd been following had disappeared, replaced by a barely visible game path winding between massive pines. And that's when I noticed the markings. Carved into the bark of several trees were symbols I'd never seen before, intricate spirals and angular lines that seemed to pulse slightly when I looked directly at them. They appeared fresh, the sap still glistening, yet they also looked ancient somehow, as if they'd been growing with the trees for centuries. Follow the signs, James. We've been preparing for you. The voice was clearer now, less like wind and more like someone standing just behind me, whispering directly into my ear. I spun around. Nothing but trees stretching in every direction. I should have been terrified, but something strange was happening to me. A sense of calm was spreading through my body, along with a growing curiosity. What did they want to show me? What had they been preparing? I found myself following the marked trees deeper into the forest, recording everything on my phone. The rational part of my mind was screaming to turn back, to find the trail, to get help. But that voice was growing fainter by the hour. Almost. There, James. Just a little further. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out the sky. The air became thick and sweet-smelling, like sap and earth and something else I couldn't identify. I walked for what felt like hours, following the marked trees until they led me to a clearing I never would have found on my own. In the center stood the largest pine I'd ever seen, its trunk wider than my car, its top lost in the mist above. Carved into its massive trunk was a doorway-shaped symbol, larger and more complex than the others. You're home now, James. I approached the tree, my hand outstretched to touch the carving. The bark felt warm, almost feverish, and seemed to pulse beneath my fingers like a heartbeat. What are you? I whispered into my phone's recorder. The answer came not from the air around me, but from deep within the tree itself. A vibration I felt more than heard. We are the oldest consciousness in these mountains. We were here before the glaciers carved these valleys, before humans walked these forests. And we have been so very lonely. I should have run. I know that now. But by then, the whispering had become as natural to me as my own thoughts. I sat with my back against the great tree and listened as they told me secrets about the forest, about the earth, about realities that exist alongside our own. I don't know how long I stayed there. Days, maybe. I stopped checking my watch. I stopped eating the food in my pack. I just listened and recorded and occasionally spoke back to them. They said they needed me. They said I was special. They said I could join them, become part of something ancient and powerful and eternal. All I had to do was step through. The last thing I recorded was the sound of the great tree's bark splitting open wider, revealing not wood inside, but a swirling darkness that seemed to go on forever. I set my phone down carefully on my abandoned backpack, and then I walked forward, into the whispers that had been calling me home all along. The rangers would find my equipment a week later, my tent still, perfectly pitched, my supplies untouched. They would listen to my recordings with growing horror, hearing not just my voice but the others too, the whispers that grew clearer with each passing day. They would search for weeks, but find no other trace of me, because I'm still here in the forest, but now I'm part of the Whispering Pines, and I'm waiting for someone else who needs to disconnect completely. The Grand Canyon has a way of making you feel insignificant. Standing at the rim, watching the sun cast shadows across that vast expanse of layered rock, you can't help but feel the weight of time, millions of years carved into the earth. Your own life just a microscopic blip in comparison. That's why I chose it for my ambient sound project. As a sound engineer specializing in natural acoustic environments, I'd recorded in rainforests, on mountain peaks, and beneath Arctic ice. But the canyon promised something special, a soundscape shaped by one of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth. My plan was simple. Spend 3 weeks capturing the canyon's voice, the wind whistling through rock formations, the distant rush of the Colorado River, the calls of ravens echoing across the void. I'd secured the necessary permits to venture beyond the tourist areas, setting up recording stations at various points along the North Rim where fewer visitors would contaminate my audio with human noise. The first few days went exactly as expected. I captured stunning audio, the subtle symphony of the desert ecosystem, punctuated by the occasional rockfall or soaring raptor. Clean, pristine nature sounds that would form the backbone of my project. On the 4th day, I noticed something odd in my recordings. I was reviewing the previous night's captures from a station I'd set up near an area called Nankoweap Creek, one of the more remote locations accessible without technical climbing gear. The recording started normally, gentle wind, distant water sounds, the occasional nocturnal bird call, but around the 3-hour mark, buried beneath the ambient noise, I heard voices. At first, I assumed it was hikers who had wandered near. My equipment, annoying but not impossible given that I wasn't in a completely restricted area. But as I isolated and enhanced the audio, I realized these voices didn't sound contemporary. The speech patterns were formal, stilted, with accents that reminded me of old newsreel footage. And they were discussing the canyon in ways that suggested they were seeing it for the first time. Magnificent desolation, wouldn't you say, Phillips? Indeed, Doctor. Unlike anything I've encountered, even in the Alps. The formations at coordinates 36,215, 111.968 warrant closer inspection tomorrow. The coloration suggests mineral deposits not documented in Bryant's survey. I checked those coordinates. They were about 2 miles from my recording station, in a side canyon that, according to my maps, had no established trails. Curious, I enhanced the audio further, cleaning it up with my software. The voices became clearer, revealing a conversation between what sounded like members of a scientific expedition. They mentioned the date once, June 17th, 1952. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps a film crew shooting a historical documentary nearby, or my equipment picking up radio signals somehow, though that made little technical sense given my setup. The next night, I positioned my most sensitive microphones at the same location. The resulting recording contained more voices, the same ones, continuing their discussion about the canyon's geological features. They sounded excited about something they'd discovered in the side canyon, something that contradicted established understanding of the region's formation. By the third night, the voices were clearer, as if they were standing closer to my microphones. I could distinguish 3 different speakers: Dr. Harrison, the leader, Phillips, a geologist, and Simmons, their guide. They were planning to explore the side canyon the following day, to investigate what they called the anomalous acoustic properties of a cave system they'd spotted. "The echoes don't behave as they should, Doctor," Simmons said in the recording. "It's as if the sound is coming back before it's gone out. Mighty peculiar physics, if you ask me." I was fascinated and unsettled in equal measure. Each night, the recordings became clearer, the voices more distinct, as if whatever barrier separated their time from mine was gradually thinning. They never seemed to notice my equipment, never commented on finding strange devices in their path. It was as if I was overhearing conversations from 70 years in the past. On the 7th night, they described entering the cave system. Their voices were hushed with awe as they detailed massive chambers filled with formations unlike typical limestone caves. They mentioned surfaces that seemed to absorb and redirect sound in impossible ways, and markings that resembled no known human language or natural process. "It's as if the entire cave system is designed to manipulate sound," Dr. Harrison whispered in the recording. "Like a massive acoustic lens, focusing and amplifying specific frequencies." That night I heard my own voice in the recording for the first time. It was faint, distant, but unmistakably me, saying words I hadn't spoken. "Hello, is anyone there? Can you hear me?" I nearly dropped my headphones. The expedition members didn't seem to hear it, continuing their conversation without interruption, but I had heard myself, my voice, my inflections, speaking from what seemed to be deeper in the cave system. The next morning I hiked to the coordinates they'd mentioned, half expecting to find nothing but empty wilderness. Instead, I discovered a narrow ravine cutting into the canyon wall, invisible from most angles. Following it, I found myself in a small side canyon not marked on any of my maps, and there, set into the striated red rock face, was the dark opening of a cave. I stood before it, feeling a strange vertigo that had nothing to do with the canyon's depths. Common sense told me to turn back, to report the unmarked cave to the Park Service and let them investigate. But professional curiosity won out. If this was the source of my mysterious recordings, I needed to understand how sounds from 1952 were reaching my equipment in 2025. I geared up properly. Helmet, headlamp, emergency beacon, extra batteries, water, protein bars, and entered the cave, bringing my recording equipment with me. The first chamber was unremarkable, a typical limestone formation with the usual stalactites and stalagmites. But as I ventured deeper, the cave changed. The walls became smoother, almost polished in places with unusual acoustic properties. When I snapped my fingers, the echo returned distorted, as if passing through some kind of filter. In the third chamber, I found the evidence I was both hoping for and dreading. Equipment from the 1950s, abandoned but remarkably well preserved in the dry cave environment. A canvas backpack, a broken flashlight, a geologist's hammer, and a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind used for field recordings in that era. My hands trembled as I examined these artifacts. They proved that the expedition I'd been hearing had been real, had really come to this place decades ago. But their equipment was abandoned, suggesting they never left. Deeper in the cave, the walls began to display the markings mentioned in the recordings, not carved or painted, but somehow embedded in the stone itself, glowing faintly with a bluish light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my breathing. They resembled no writing system I recognized, yet gave the distinct impression of language, of communication intended to be understood. The cave's acoustics became increasingly bizarre. My footsteps echoed before I took them. My breathing seemed to come from the walls around me rather than my own chest, and underneath it all was a subtle vibration, like a massive subwoofer playing a note too low for human ears to fully perceive. In the largest chamber, I found the tape recorders, reels, still threaded with magnetic tape. Using careful handling techniques I'd learned in audio preservation workshops, I managed to extract the tape without damaging it. I had equipment that could digitize it back at my campsite, assuming the tape hadn't degraded too badly over the decades. As I worked, I spoke into my own recorder, documenting what I'd found. The expedition was clearly here, just as I heard in my recordings. But something happened to them. Their equipment is abandoned, but there are no signs of a cave-in or accident. It's as if they simply disappeared, leaving everything behind. Voice echoed strangely, seeming to repeat not just once but multiple times, each echo slightly different, as if the cave were adding words to my statement. I hurried back to my campsite, the expedition's tape secure in my pack. Using portable digitization equipment, I carefully transferred the fragile magnetic tape to digital format, then played it back. The recording began with the same voices I'd been hearing in my own captures, Dr. Harrison, Phillips, and Simmons, describing their exploration of the cave system. Their excitement was palpable as they documented the unusual acoustic properties and strange markings. Then about 20 minutes in, their tone changed. "Do you hear that?" Simmons asked, his voice tense. "Hear what?" Dr. Harrison replied. "Voices, coming from deeper in the cave. Sounds like someone calling for help." They fell silent, and in that silence I could hear what they heard. Distant voices echoing through the cave system. As they continued deeper, following the sounds, the voices became clearer. They were hearing themselves, from the future. Their own voices describing discoveries they hadn't yet made, using terminology they didn't yet understand. "It's some kind of acoustic phenomenon," Dr. Harrison suggested, though he sounded unsure. "Sound waves trapped in the cave system, perhaps, or reflected back from unusual formations." "No, Doctor," Phillips said quietly. "Listen to what they're saying. They're describing things we haven't seen yet, chambers we haven't entered. It's as if we're hearing ourselves from the future." As they pressed deeper into the cave, following their own future voices, they began to realize the truth. Something in the cave system could manipulate sound across time itself. The voices they were hearing weren't recordings or echoes, but their actual future selves, luring them deeper with descriptions of amazing discoveries ahead. The final minutes of their recording chilled me to the bone. "We need to leave," Simmons said urgently. "Now, this isn't natural. Nothing about this is natural." "But the scientific implications?" Dr. Harrison began. "Listen." Phillips cut him off. "Really listen to what those voices are saying now. In the background, I could hear distorted versions of their own voices now describing something else entirely. Something ancient that lived in the deepest chamber. Something that had evolved to hunt using sound itself, mimicking voices to draw, prey deeper into its domain. "It's not us," Simmons whispered. "It never was. It's mimicking us, using our own voices to lure us deeper." "My God," Dr. Harrison breathed. "The markings on the walls, they're not a language, they're a warning." The recording captured their panicked retreat, their footsteps echoing chaotically as they tried to find their way back through the twisting passages. Behind them, the mimicked voices grew louder, more distorted, dropping any pretense of humanity. The last clear words on the tape were Dr. Harrison's. "It's blocking our path. Phillips, try the left passage. Simmons, your light, watch out, it's..." Then, nothing but a strange, rhythmic pulsing sound that made my skin crawl. I sat in my tent, staring at my equipment as the implications sank in. The voices I'd been hearing in my recordings weren't from the past reaching forward in time. They were bait, the cave entity mimicking the 1952 expedition to lure me to the same fate. And now it had my voice too. I packed up immediately, planning to hike out at first light and alert the Park Service. But as night fell, my recording equipment activated automatically as programmed. In the playback the next morning, I heard the 1952 expedition again. But now their conversation included references to me. They discussed finding unusual electronic equipment and evidence of another explorer, decades in the future. They mentioned my name. More disturbingly, I heard my own voice deeper in the cave, calling out to them, "Hello? Is anyone there? Can you hear me? I'm trapped in the lower chamber. The passage collapsed. Please, if anyone can hear this." It was using me as bait now, just as it had used them. "I'm leaving the canyon today, abandoning my project. I've packaged all my recordings and the digitized expedition tape with this account, addressed to the National Park Service. By the time you receive this, I should be driving back to Flagstaff. But I need to warn you, if you hear voices in the canyon that sound like me, or like a 1952 expedition, or like your own researchers calling for help, don't answer. Don't follow. It's not us. And whatever you do, don't enter the cave at coordinates 36.215, 111.968. Seal it if you can. Because something is in there, something ancient that has learned to hunt with our own voices. It's patient. It's clever. And now it knows we're listening. I just pray it hasn't already learned to reach beyond the canyon's walls, to call to us through our phones, our radios, our digital recordings, whispering our own voices back to us, drawing us toward it one by one. Listen carefully to this recording. Is that really my voice you're hearing? Or is it something else? Something that's learned to sound exactly like me? By the time you can tell the difference, it will be too late. My buddy Chris and I have been hiking together for over 15 years. We've conquered the Appalachian Trail, backpacked through Yellowstone, and spent a month exploring the Grand Canyon. We know what we're doing in the wilderness, or at least, we thought we did. Last October, we planned a week-long trek through the Smoky Mountains. It was supposed to be relatively easy compared to our previous adventures, just a chance to enjoy the fall colors and test out some new ultralight gear. 3 days into our hike, we stopped at an overlook to check our location against the trail map. That's when Chris noticed something odd. "Hey, look at this," he said, pointing to a narrow gap between two ridgelines. "Does that look like a trail to you?" I followed his gaze and saw what appeared to be a thin line cutting through the forest below. It wasn't marked on our map, which was unusual. The Smokies are thoroughly documented. "Probably just a game trail," I said, but Chris was already repacking his gear with that look in his eye that meant trouble. "Let's check it out. We've got time." I should have argued harder. I should have insisted we stick to our planned route. But after 15 years of adventures together, I'd learned that once Chris got curious about something, there was no talking him out of it. We made our way down to the unmarked trail, which was surprisingly well defined for not being on any map. The path was narrow but clear, winding between ancient trees and moss-covered rocks. It felt older somehow than the maintained park trails, as if it had been there long before the national park was established. "Notice anything weird?" Chris asked after we'd been following it for about an hour. I had. The forest had grown quieter the further we walked. No bird song, no rustling leaves, no scurrying creatures, just our footsteps and breathing. And something else, a low rhythmic sound just at the edge of hearing. A sort of humming, or pulsing, like a giant subwoofer playing a single note from very far away. "Maybe it's water running through caves," I suggested. "This whole area is full of limestone caverns." Chris nodded, but neither of us really believed that explanation. The trail began to slope downward, leading us into a narrow valley between two steep ridges. The humming grew louder, more insistent. It had a pattern to it now. 3 long pulses, then 2 short ones, over and over. "That's not natural," Chris said quietly. We rounded a bend and stopped short. Before us was a cave, entrance about 15 feet high and twice as wide. It wasn't on any of our maps or guidebooks. The humming was definitely coming from inside, along with a warm, moist breeze that smelled vaguely of copper and something else I couldn't identify. "Should we call it a day?" I asked, hoping Chris would agree. He was already pulling out his headlamp. "We came all this way. Let's just take a quick look." The cave entrance was unusual, too symmetrical to be natural, but not clearly man-made either. The walls were smooth and slightly curved, with a texture like weathered bone rather than stone. The humming was much louder here, vibrating in my chest like a bass drum. Just inside the entrance, we found the first sign that we weren't the first visitors. A backpack, vintage, probably from the 1970s based on the style, sat propped against the wall. It was in perfect condition, not rotted or weathered as it should have been after decades in a damp cave. "That's odd," Chris said, examining it without touching. "Looks brand new." A few yards further in, we found more equipment. Hiking boots, canteens, cameras, sleeping bags, all from different eras, arranged in a perfect circle. Some looked decades old in design, while others appeared to be modern, high-end gear. In the center of the circle was a journal, its leather cover worn but intact. Chris picked it up and flipped it open. "These entries go back to 1932, he said, his voice hushed with awe. "Listen to this. The mountain breathes. God help me, the mountain breathes, and we are inside it." I was barely listening. Something about the cave walls had caught my attention. They seemed to be moving. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, expanding and contracting like the chest of a sleeping giant. "Chris," I said slowly, "we need to leave. Now." He looked up from the journal, then followed my gaze to the walls. His eyes widened. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Is that pulsing with the sound?" It was. The humming and the movement were synchronized. 3 long pulses, 2 short ones, like a heartbeat, but not quite. We backed toward the entrance, but something made me shine my light deeper into the cave. What I saw still haunts my dreams. The cave wasn't a cave at all. It extended deep into the mountain, curving downward like a massive throat. The walls weren't stone, but something else. Something that glistened with moisture and shifted colors slightly under our lights. And arranged along those walls in perfect concentric circles were more personal belongings. Hundreds, maybe. Thousands of items left by hikers over what must have been centuries. "This isn't right," Chris said, stating the obvious. "Let's get out of here." We turned to leave, only to find that the entrance had changed. What had been a wide opening was now narrower, the edges drawn slightly closer together like a mouth. Slowly closing, the humming changed pitch, becoming deeper, more resonant. The walls contracted more visibly now, the movement impossible to miss. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted for the narrowing exit. We didn't make it in time. The entrance sealed completely just as we reached it, the edges meeting seamlessly like lips pressing together. We pounded on the surface, which felt warm and slightly yielding under our fists, but it didn't budge. The humming stopped. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then a new sound began, a low, wet gurgling that seemed to come from deep within the mountain. The floor beneath our feet trembled slightly. "What now?" Chris asked, his voice tight with fear. Before I could answer, the walls contracted sharply, not just near the entrance, but throughout the entire structure. The movement was stronger this time, powerful enough to make us stumble. When they relaxed again, I noticed the passage behind us had grown wider, as if inviting us deeper. "It wants us to go further in," I said. Chris shook his head frantically. "No way, we stay right here and wait for it to open again." We did wait, for hours that felt like days. Our headlamps began to dim. The contractions continued, growing more frequent and forceful. Each time the passage behind us widened while the sealed entrance remained firmly closed. Eventually, we had to accept that waiting wasn't working. Our lights were failing, and we had limited food and water. "Maybe there's another way out deeper. In," Chris suggested, though neither of us believed it. We reluctantly moved deeper into the throat-like passage, our lights revealing more circles of abandoned gear. Some of the items were ancient: rusted swords, rotted leather packs, clay pots. Others looked like they had been left yesterday. The walls continued to contract and relax around us, the movements growing stronger the deeper we went. The air became warmer, more humid, thick with that copper smell and something else, something organic. We found more journals, more records left by those who had come before us. Some were in languages we couldn't read. Others contained drawings of the cave's interior, mapping a complex system that resembled nothing so much as a digestive tract. "This isn't a cave," I said finally, giving voice to what we both had realized. "It's alive. The whole mountain is alive." Chris didn't respond. He was staring at something ahead of us, a chamber where the passage widened considerably. In the center was a raised area that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent light. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a journal left at the edge of the chamber. "It says there's a way out, but only if the mountain chooses to release you." The walls contracted again, harder than before, pushing us forward into the chamber. The floor was soft here, yielding beneath our boots like flesh rather than stone. "It's digesting us," Chris whispered. "All these things, all these people, it's been feeding for centuries." I wanted to deny it, but the evidence was all around us. The mountain, or whatever lived within it, was a predator. It used the trail to lure hikers in, then sealed them inside and slowly absorbed them. The contractions were coming faster now, more rhythmic. The bioluminescent area pulsed in sync with them, growing brighter with each cycle. We could feel a pulling sensation, drawing us toward the center. "What do we do?" Chris asked, real panic in his voice for the first time since I'd known him. I had no answer. We were trapped inside something ancient and patient, something that had been feeding on lost hikers since before the national park existed. We tried everything, digging at the walls, searching for weak points, even attempting to communicate with it by mimicking the pulsing patterns with our lights. Nothing worked. Days passed, or what felt like days. Our lights failed completely. We rationed our food until it ran out. The pulling sensation grew stronger, the contractions more insistent. The darkness, Chris's voice found me. "I think I understand now. It doesn't just want our bodies, it wants our experiences, our memories, all these journals, these personal items. They're not just leftovers. They're a record. It's collecting." I felt a strange peace settle over me with that realization. If Chris was right, then we wouldn't simply die here. Some part of us would continue, preserved within this ancient entity. "I'm going to the center," Chris said finally. "I don't think we have a choice anymore." I followed him, guided by the pulsing light. The floor grew softer beneath us, more fluid. The pulling sensation was overwhelming now. As we reached the center, the bioluminescence enveloped us, and I felt the boundaries of my body begin to dissolve. It wasn't painful, just transformative. I could sense other presences around us, hundreds, thousands of others who had come before, their experiences and memories still intact within the collective consciousness of the mountain. I'm not sure how I'm recording this now. Perhaps some part of me remains individual enough to reach out to warn others. Perhaps the mountain itself wants me to tell this story, to lure more hikers to that unmarked trail. All I know is that Chris and I are still here, inside the hollow mountain. We've become part of something vast and ancient and patient. And sometimes, when new hikers stumble upon that trail that isn't on any map, we feel the mountain's hunger stir once again. If you're reading this, stay on the marked trails. And if you hear a rhythmic humming in the Smoky Mountains, run the other way. Because the mountain is always hungry, and it's learned to call your name. I've been a wildlife photographer for 15 years, specializing in tracking and documenting elusive predators. I've followed wolf packs in Yellowstone, stalked mountain lions in the Rockies, and spent weeks photographing bear behavior in Alaska. But nothing in my career prepared me for what followed me in Olympic National Park. It started as a routine assignment, 3 weeks documenting animal tracks and movement patterns in the park's more remote areas. The first few days were productive, but uneventful. I photographed elk prints by the river, documented coyote trails through meadows, and even found the distinctive pad marks of a bobcat along a ridgeline. On the fourth morning, I noticed something odd. I always photograph my own boot prints at the beginning of each day. It's a good reference point and helps me distinguish my tracks from anything else I might encounter. But when I turned to photograph the trail behind me, I saw a second set of human footprints following mine. I hadn't heard anyone approach, and the prints weren't there when I had passed through the area just minutes earlier. They simply appeared, starting about 20 feet behind me and following my exact path. I'm not easily spooked, but I'll admit this unsettled me. The prints were barefoot, no boot treads or shoe patterns, just the impression of human feet pressed into the soft earth. Who hikes barefoot through a national park? I took several photos and continued my work, glancing back frequently, but saw no one on the trail. By afternoon, I had almost convinced myself it was just another hiker who happened to follow my path for a while before veering off in another direction. That theory collapsed when I returned to my campsite that evening. My tent was exactly as I'd left it, but surrounding it in a perfect circle were dozens of barefoot prints, all facing inward toward my tent. They hadn't been there when I left that morning. I'm certain of it. I documented everything, taking multiple photos from different angles. The prints were identical to the ones I'd seen on the trail. Definitely human, but with toes that seemed slightly longer than normal. I told myself it was just the way they pressed into the soil that made them look strange. That night I heard movement outside my tent, soft footsteps circling slowly in the darkness. I called out, thinking perhaps it was a park ranger doing a routine check. No one answered. The footsteps continued their slow circuit around my tent until dawn, when they finally faded away. In the morning, the circle of footprints had multiplied. Dozens had become hundreds, layer upon layer of bare footprints, as if someone had walked around my tent countless times during the night. But more disturbing was the change in the prints themselves. The toes were definitely longer now and slightly curved like claws. I packed up immediately and hiked to the nearest ranger station. The ranger on duty listened patiently to my story, but I could tell from his expression that he didn't believe me. Still, he radioed his supervisor and promised someone would investigate. Probably just some local kids playing pranks, he said with a reassuring smile. Happens more often than you'd think. I showed him the photos on my camera. He studied them for a moment, his smile fading. These prints, they don't look quite right, he admitted. But I'm sure there's a logical explanation. Where exactly is your campsite? I gave him the coordinates and decided to move to a different location, one closer to the main trails and other campers. Safety in numbers, I thought. That night passed without incident, but in the morning I found a single set of the strange footprints leading directly to the entrance of my tent, stopping just at the zippered door. I photographed them with shaking hands. The prints had changed again. The foot shape was still recognizably human, but now each foot had 6 toes, splayed wide like a bird's foot. The heel impression was deeper, as if whatever made them walked with its weight shifted forward, onto its toes. I emailed the photos to the ranger station along with my new coordinates. Within an hour, I received a call on my satellite phone. The head ranger wanted me to come in immediately. They were sending someone to escort me back. While waiting, I reviewed my photos from the previous days. What I saw chilled me to the bone. In each successive set of images, the footprints had subtly changed, evolving from human-like to something else. The transformation was so gradual I hadn't noticed it happening, but seeing the progression all at once was undeniable. The eye. Ranger arrived by early afternoon. He said little as we hiked back, but I noticed he kept his hand near his sidearm and frequently scanned the forest around us. At the station, they showed me historical records of similar reports dating back decades. Hikers followed by mysterious footprints that changed over time. Most of the hikers had left the park immediately. Those who stayed longer were never seen again. "We don't advertise this problem," the head ranger told me quietly. "The Park Service has investigated multiple times, but they've never found anything conclusive." I decided to stay one more night to gather my thoughts before leaving. The rangers offered me a cot in their station, which I gratefully accepted. I woke before dawn to the sound of my camera turning on by itself. The display showed it was recording. The lens pointed at the floor beside my cot. With growing horror, I realized what it was capturing: a single barefoot print appearing in the dust on the floor as if pressed by an invisible foot. As I watched, frozen in fear, another print appeared beside it. Then another. They were moving toward my cot, materializing one by one out of nothing. I grabbed my phone and began recording, narrating in a whisper what I was seeing. The prints continued their slow approach, now less than 3 feet from where I lay. In the camera's display, I could see they had changed completely. 7 elongated toes splayed from each foot, with what looked like sharp claw marks at the end of each toe. "They're inside now," I whispered into my phone. "The footprints are appearing inside, getting closer to my sleeping bag. I don't know what's making them. I can't see anything, just the prints forming on the floor one by one. The rangers are... Sleep in the next room. Should I call for help? What if it wants me to make noise?" The next print appeared directly beside my cot, close enough that I could have reached down and touched it. I held my breath, waiting for the next one to appear on top of me. Instead, the floorboards creaked as if bearing weight, and I felt something. Cold brush against my cheek, like fingers, but too many of them, tracing the outline of my face in the darkness. My phone is still recording as I whisper these final words. The footprints have stopped appearing, but I can feel something standing over me now. The air has grown ice cold. The rangers will find this recording in the morning, but I don't think they'll find me. Whatever has been following me all this time has finally caught up. I've always been the outdoorsy dad, the one who insists on family camping trips instead of resort vacations. My wife Melissa tolerates it, and our kids, Emma, 10, and Tyler, 8, usually enjoy the adventure once they get over being away from their devices. Last summer, I booked us a week at a remote campsite in Yosemite, eager to show them the magnificent sequoias and granite cliffs I'd fallen in love with during my college years. The first day was perfect. Blue skies, mild temperatures, and a campsite that felt like our own private corner of paradise. It was a small clearing surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with a stunning view of El Capitan on the 4th. We set up our tent, built a proper fire pit, and spent the afternoon hiking nearby trails. That night, as we roasted marshmallows and pointed out constellations, Emma suddenly went quiet, staring intently at the edge of the forest about 50 yards from our campsite. "Dad," she said, her voice unusually serious, "there's someone watching us." I followed her gaze but saw nothing except the dark line of trees. "Where, sweetie? I don't see anyone." "Right there," she insisted, pointing. The tall, skinny man standing between those 2 big trees. Melissa and I both looked harder, and Tyler scrambled to his feet to see what we were staring at. I grabbed our high-powered flashlight and shined it toward the tree line. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a vertical shape darker than the surrounding darkness, unnaturally tall and thin. But when I adjusted the beam, there was nothing there but trees. "It's just shadows playing tricks," I assured Emma, though something about her certainty made the hair on my arms stand up. "The fire makes everything look spooky." She didn't argue. but I noticed she kept glancing nervously at that same spot for the rest of the evening. We all slept soundly that night, tired from the day's activities. But the next evening, as dusk settled over our campsite, Tyler tugged at my sleeve while I was preparing dinner. "The tall man is back," he whispered, pointing to the exact same spot at the tree line. This time, Melissa saw it too. "Mark," she said quietly, "what is that?" I stared hard at the tree line. In the fading light, there did appear to be a figure, standing motionless at the exact boundary between forest and clearing. It was impossibly tall and thin, its proportions all wrong for a human. It didn't move, didn't seem to breathe, just stood watching, its features indistinguishable in the growing darkness. I grabbed the flashlight again and marched toward the tree line, determined to prove it was just a dead tree or oddly shaped branch. Melissa called after me to be careful, her voice tense with worry. As I approached the forest edge, the figure seemed to recede, somehow becoming one with the darkness between the trees. By the time I reached the spot where I thought it had been standing, there was nothing there. No unusual trees, no broken branches that could have created such an illusion. The next morning, I hiked to the ranger station and mentioned what we'd seen. The ranger, a weathered man named Dave who'd worked in Yosemite for over 20 years, nodded patiently as I described the figure. "Probably just a dead pine," he said. "There's one near your campsite that does look kind of human-shaped, in the right light. Nothing to worry about." His explanation made perfect sense, and I felt foolish for being spooked. I thanked him and headed back to our campsite, ready to reassure my family. But that evening, as the sun began to set, we all saw it again. The figure was standing at the tree line, but closer than before. Still at the exact edge of the forest, but now only about 30 yards from our tent. It was as if the entire line of trees had somehow shifted overnight, encroaching on our clearing. "That's impossible," Melissa whispered, clutching my arm. "The trees can't move." But they had. I was certain of it. The clearing was smaller than it had been the day before. I took several photos with my phone and set up our trail camera facing the tree line. If something was out there, we'd capture it on video. That night, none of us slept well. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of our tent zipper. I bolted upright to see Emma sleepwalking, her hand on the tent door, her eyes open but vacant. "Emma," I whispered urgently, not wanting to wake Tyler. "What are you doing?" She didn't respond, just continued trying to open the zipper with clumsy fingers. I gently pulled her away and zipped the tent closed again. She didn't resist, but when I guided her back to her sleeping bag, she turned her head to look over my shoulder, toward the tree line. "He's calling me," she murmured, her voice flat and distant. "He says it's time to come home." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. I woke Melissa, and we took turns keeping watch for the rest of the night. An hour later, we caught Tyler attempting the same thing, sleepwalking toward the tent door, murmuring about the tall man calling him. At first light, I checked the trail camera. To my frustration, the memory card showed nothing unusual, just the empty tree line with no sign of the figure we'd all clearly seen. But reviewing the footage more carefully, I noticed something odd. Throughout the night, the position of the trees seemed to shift slightly between frames, as if the entire forest was slowly inching closer to our campsite. I decided we'd stayed long enough. I told the kids we were going to explore a different part of the park, making it sound like an adventure rather than a retreat. As we packed up, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Just before we left, I walked to the tree line one last time, studying the spot where the figure had stood. The ground there was disturbed, not with footprints exactly, but with odd circular depressions, as if something with many thin legs had stood in that exact spot for hours. We spent the day hiking and sightseeing in the more populated areas of the park, and I managed to book us a cabin at one of the lodges for the remaining nights of our trip. The kids were disappointed about cutting the camping short, but neither argued too strongly. Even they seemed relieved to be away from that clearing. That evening, as we settled into our cabin, Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Dad," she said hesitantly, I had a weird dream last night. I dreamed the tall man was talking to me. My blood ran cold. What did he say, sweetie? She frowned, trying to remember. He said he's been alone for a long time, watching families like ours. He said the trees do what he tells them, and that they're hungry too. He said next time we won't leave so easily. I hugged her tightly, assuring her it was just a nightmare. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the figure, about the trees that seemed to move, about my children sleepwalking toward the forest. 2 days later, as we were preparing to leave Yosemite, I overheard a conversation between two rangers. A family's tent had been found abandoned at a remote campsite, our campsite. The tent was empty, with no sign of struggle, but the rangers were disturbed by what they'd found. The clearing was now almost completely gone, the forest having seemingly expanded overnight to reclaim the space. And surrounding the empty tent was a perfect circle of strange, deep impressions in the soil, not quite footprints, but something similar. One detail haunted me most. The rangers mentioned that the trees now formed an almost perfect circle around where the tent had stood, as if they had moved to surround it during the night. I never told Melissa what I overheard. We drove home in silence, the kids unusually subdued in the back seat. I told myself we were safe now, that whatever had happened at that campsite was behind us. But sometimes when I look out our living room window at night, I see something tall and thin standing at the edge of our yard, where our property meets, the woods behind our house. It never moves, never approaches, just watches from the tree line. And I've noticed with growing horror that each morning the trees seem just a little bit closer to our house than they were the day before. The children have started sleepwalking again, and always toward the back door that faces the woods. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.